Good afternoon, all participants. And welcome to the annual spring meeting of the Washington Farm Forestry Association Kittitas Chapter. I'm Patty O'Hearn, the Secretary Treasurer of our chapter, and Phil Hess is our president. And I'm really happy to be able to bring this presentation to you today on the Checkerboard Partnership update of activities that have been going on the last several years. And to do the presentation, we have Melissa Speg, of Project Manager for Kittitas Conservation Trust, Jane Kiker, of Conservation Transaction Director of the Nature Conservancy in Washington, and Katie Profall, the Eastern Washington Community Relations Manager of the Nature Conservancy in Washington. So I'm asked people to be sure you're muted during the conversation or during the presentation. And there at the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a chat box, and please use that if you have questions that come up during the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, Melissa will go through the questions. So with that, I will hand off to Melissa. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, Patty. Well, hi, everyone. My name, like Patty said, my name is Melissa Speg. I work for Kittitas Conservation Trust, which is a small land trust that operates mainly in Kittitas County, or actually all in Kittitas County. And today I'm here to talk to you about a really cool project that we're working on to permanently protect 27,000 acres here in Kittitas County. And one of the reasons why I'm the person talking to you is I help facilitate this group. So it's a great group of community members that have come together and really are rallied around this. And by default, I'm here as a spokesperson or a partial spokesperson today. So, okay. So in 2014, Plum Creek put up over 48,000 acres in Washington for sale. And when they did that, a lot of partners in the basin and community members realized that this, this threatened the loss of their access and where they recreate, and generally where the backdrop that we look at every day, but nobody had the capital in order to purchase it from them. So the Nature Conservancy went to a private conservation investor, and they asked them if they would be willing to purchase the land for a set amount of time in order to kind of put the pause on it being developed and give us time to figure out how we could protect it and keep it within, like, keep it undeveloped lands within our community. So with that, like I said, we kind of have a timeline though, like protection from development isn't permanent. At the end of the day, we need to find a permanent conservation solution for these lands, and there's no guarantee that we're going to continue to have access to the trails that are already up there, and the forest health work that has been ongoing. And like I said, there's originally 48,000 acres. A lot of those acres kind of made sense to go back to the Forest Service. But there's this 27,000 acres originally that didn't quite fit the mold of that, and so the challenge began. And so the Nature Conservancy came to a lot of people in the community, and they said, "Hey, we've been thinking about this, and we're wondering if a community forest wouldn't be like the right answer in this situation." And so I had the pleasure, along with some other people in the community, of going and visiting community forests across the country and kind of learning the different stories about community forests. And it was an amazing experience. And the takeaway that we all had was that, yeah, we can do this here. We can make this happen. And so we decided to name ourselves the Checkerboard Partnership and to start to work on this. And we determined that, the beneficiaries of the community forest would be people residing in Kittitas County and the Yakima Nation. So our mission is to permanently protect these lands so that our community can continue to access and enjoy them for future generations. And our vision is that we can create a community forest that serves the needs of those that live here now and in the future. You know, we've been lucky enough to have access to these lands, but prior to now, and we want to make sure that that continues for the generations that live after us as well. Katie.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for having us today. I'm Katie Pofall, Community Relations Manager with the Nature Conservancy in Washington, and I work really closely with Melissa, Jane, and then of course Patty, Phil, and also on the call today I think it's Nikki Pazzi, who are all part of the Checkerboard Partnership. So I was just going to share a little bit more about the conditions for acquisition that we've developed as part of our process as the Checkerboard Partnership and the Nature Conservancy, and a little bit more about some of our forest management work. So, you know, in this transition for these lands, we wanted to create what we kind of consider sideboards, or things that, you know, we want to make sure carry through with the land to the future permanent owner and for the long-term care of the land. So a really important part of that is restricting development. You know, as you've seen, you know, a lot of the Kittitas County is experiencing quite a bit of growth, and we think these lands have a role to play as working forests and recreation, and for water catchment for the community. And so we also want to make sure that we're maintaining public access as a value. These are lands that are really culturally relevant in the area. We can talk a little bit more about that later. And then respect for treaty rights and the cultural practices of the tribes. And in particular in this area, the Yakima Nation holds these lands to be really important. We'd also like to ensure that as we transfer these lands, we're working with fair market value for the property. So you'll hear a little bit more from our transactions director, Jane, about how we determine that and where those things stand a little later in the presentation. And then we also are committed to active forest management. And in particular, you know, we'll talk a little bit more later about forest health, but also where that's possible for forestry and, you know, producing income that can help benefit our communities. And then maintaining recreation as is consistent with our community. Recreation isn't perfect for every place. And so you'll see that our strategy kind of includes having recreation where it makes sense adjacent to communities and where it's already been established, and areas that are, you know, designated for other types of use, including working forestry, forest lands, particularly up towards the summit. And then an ongoing commitment to pay local property taxes. We know that these lands are really important for, you know, our county's tax base and beyond. And so just making sure that we're paying our fair share and making sure that future landowners would do the same. So thanks, moving on. So so this is a different map than what Melissa shared a little bit earlier. And what I think is helpful about this one is it kind of breaks it down into what we consider the 4 remaining landscapes. Some of the lands that are part of that initial 47,000 plus acre transaction have already been transitioned to the permanent landowner. These are the ones that remain to be transferred. And so we'll talk a little bit more about these landscapes in particular. I want to point out on the top right, we've got the Cle Ridge, which is above the communities of Ronald, Roslyn, and Cle which is a mix of dry forest and some wetter forest, and an area that we really focus on for community values and is a key focus for our community forest strategy. And then on the left, we have Cabin Creek, which we'll talk a little bit more about. We've got some exciting developments there, but that's largely a wetter forest that has more timber value. And then the part to the south is in the Tainham area, and that's interspersed with US Forest Service lands, much drier forest, and it's a popular recreation area as well. So those start to kind of hint at some of our future strategies there, and what values we can hold for each of these places. And we've tried to incorporate those values into some of the plans that we have made for these landscapes. So I'm going to jump in and share just a little bit more next about our ongoing work and the ways that we have worked on these landscapes. And these are just a couple of examples. But first, I want to focus in on that Cle Elum Ridge property, which is near our communities of Ronald, Roslyn, and Cle Elum. And I live in Roslyn, so I feel, pretty personally invested in forest health and wildfire safety for our community here. The Cle Elum Ridge, in particular, is a high priority landscape in the Washington State's 20-year forest health strategic plan and the DNR 10-year wildfire strategic plan as well. So we focused a lot of effort in the past several years on forest health in that landscape in particular to reduce the fire risk for our community. So we do things like fuels reduction, including mastication, pre-commercial thinning, and commercial thinning on that landscape. And also one key piece that we're really excited to be able to be growing in this area, and working across Eastern Washington is in prescribed fire. So that landscape, the Cle Elum Ridge, is often used annually as part of the Cascadia Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, which is a program that's a partnership between the Nature Conservancy and a collaboration with the Washington Prescribed Fire Council and the Washington Resource Conservation and Development Council. And then we partner with local fire departments and landowners to bring good fire to this landscape, which can reduce the threat of wildfire even more than the additional than that prior forest health work, such as mastication and commercial thinning. So you can see an image of that in the top right, also actually in my background screen. And it's something that we are really excited to be able to do safely and start introducing back into these forests, because these are, of course, fire adapted landscapes. You can see that ponderosa there. And it should, make it through just fine and grow into a bigger commercially valuable tree and protect the forest from future fire, from catastrophic future wildfire. So I also just wanted to mention, these are collaborations that we're really excited to be able to bring to this region. Of course, it's a high priority for the community of these communities, these towns. And so we're getting a lot of collaboration from DNR, as well as organizations like the Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition. So we've written several collaborative grants and have had a lot of success this past year. In particular, the city of Roslyn received $750,000 in earmark funds from the federal congressional budgeting process, thanks to advocacy from our representative, Kim Schreier. So we'll be able to get a lot of work done this coming year, and we continue to really focus on that area as we move towards a long-term strategy for what the future of this land will be. In the meantime, we really want it to be protected from catastrophic fire to protect our communities. And then I also wanted to mention, we do provide recreation on these lands currently. The Nature Conservancy, actively manages these lands, both for watershed health and then also recreation. So up on the Cle Elum Ridge, we've got the Towns to Teanaway project. We partner with the Mountains to Sound Greenway there. Nikki Pazzi's on the line. So if you've got questions about that afterwards, she can chat with you more. And it's a really awesome way to provide multi-use trails that help drive the investment in this community through the recreation economy, and provide resources to locals that make this place such a great place to live, and connect the 50,000 acre Teanaway Community Forest, which is just over the ridge on the Cle Elum Ridge, to the broader landscape through recreation. And then, of course, we also work on recreation, particularly in the Tainum, where we partner with the US Forest Service on this very popular single track motorized recreation trail area. So we're working on a Title II grant there as well to improve those trails. So that's just a little bit of kind of the ongoing work that we do to ensure that these forests are well cared for while they're under our care. So I'll pass it on to, I think it's Jane next.
Oh, no, it's me.
Oh, Melissa.
You're back. You're stuck with me again. Okay, well, so when we When we started, we really wanted to understand how our community in particular valued these lands and understand some of the priorities that they had for the lands. So between October and November of 2020, we put out a community survey. And we did this by sharing information where people could go online. We also put out paper copies at like physical locations that are popular in our community. So for instance, in Clallam, we had one at Pioneer Coffee. In Roslyn, I believe we had one at Base Camp. We had a few locations. We had a location up in Ronald, some locations down in Ellensburg. I think even one in Kittitas and one in Easton, because we really wanted to hear from people what they thought. And we definitely had people also from out of town fill these out as well, but we had a really good response from our community. Over 400 people kind of responded and let us know what they valued about these lands. And the results have been really helpful in understanding, you know, like, is this a value to our community? So it says completing analysis now, but we've finished up our analysis. And down the road, like it'll, you know, the survey may also help with like determining like what are the management priorities as well. And fire and health was the top issue, not only for our residents here, but interestingly also for non-residents. They really see the value of that work and, you know, not wanting to lose these lands to catastrophic fire. Which is, you know, as Katie was explaining, is something that they're doing now, and it is the expectation that that high level of work continue as we move into the future. Okay, so we also want to understand like what benefits do people want from these lands? And both residents and non-residents care about being able to use these lands in the future. You know, if you are coming here to visit, like that's probably why you're coming. And if you live here, a lot of people live here because of the access that they have. Visitors care more about recreation and access, whereas our residents cared about recreation, but they also cared about habitat a lot, you know. I think living up here, we, you know, see the wildlife that and plants that we live with every day, and that was of tremendous value to our community. So we also asked what the public's priorities were for managing these lands. And there was a significant difference between how residents and those visiting, you know, think about management. So residents want management to be focused on forest health. They want it to be focused on water, and they want it to be focused on fish and wildlife. Whereas our visitors, when they come, they want it to be focused on forest health, but also on recreation and public access as well. And then, you know, we asked about like the different values that, you know, that people have for these lands. Recreation, you know, is of high value to both residents and non-residents. You know, the proximity and access to these lands, a lot of these lands, I live in Roslyn as well, you know, the Plum Ridge is in my backyard. And I deeply value that. And I think a lot of the residents that live here in the county do as well. I do want to note that traditional uses was 0, but we were not successful in getting this survey distributed among members of the Yakama Nation. So it's not really, I wouldn't say it is indicative of like that value really. It was just our inability to get that to people who value those things. All right. The other thing we did specifically for the community forest is that I went out with Gary Burnt, who's on the call right now as well, and we sat down with a lot of our local leaders to understand their values specifically. And there were some really interesting conversations. You know, our takeaways from the cities were that the ridge is very important, and they don't want to see it developed. They see that, you know, that would make managing these lands for forest health a lot more challenging, and, you know, increase the fire risk to our community significantly. We also sat down and talked with like our local fire districts and the sheriff's office. And, you know, they said specifically for the Plum Ridge lands that they were very concerned if there was developed, that they're not going to be able to service those areas safely. You know, these lands are steep, and getting like a good road grade up there is very challenging. And so responding to fires, responding for emergency medical situations and those things are of a huge concern to them. And around all of this, we have done a tremendous amount of outreach and transparency. We have open monthly meetings that people are welcome to come and attend. We also have our own website, and we're somewhat active on social media. We could probably be better about that. We've given a lot of presentations to different groups in our communities, like the WFFA that we're doing today, to kind of bring awareness to this project and try to get and rally community support. We've also published articles in our local newspapers, and even a few times, like even to larger newspapers like the Yakima Herald and the Spokesman Review. And then we've done a lot of advocacy work. This work isn't possible without having the support of our legislators, and there's a lot of conversations to be had with them in order to ensure that we're successful in this project. Jane, looking at you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everybody, for having us. As was explained earlier, I'm Jane Kiker. I'm the Conservation Transactions Director for the state chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I work out of Seattle, the office, and more recently my home in Seattle. But today I'm coming to you from the White River floodplain. I'm up at a friend's cabin, and I'm happy to say that the clouds are parting. The blue sky is coming through. So as the Nature Conservancy and the Checkerboard Partnership have worked together on our community vision to get these 27,000 acres of former Plum Creek timberlands into permanent protection, we've considered many potential land ownership models. These include the Forest Service, Washington State DNR, Kittitas Conservation Trust, local cities, a PDA, which is a quasi-municipal corporation, or even the county. For TNC, it has always been about finding a willing transferee that is able to manage the forest sustainably and to protect their conservation values long-term. We're very focused on reconnecting the checkerboard properties wherever possible, consolidating ownership for more holistic management and restoration. Can you go to the next slide, Melissa? So CCF's Tainum watershed acreage is 12,000 acres. It's characterized by dry east side forests, abundant motorized recreation, and the many homeowners associations that border it to the north. One of the more obvious approaches to permanent protection is to include some of these former Plum Creek timberlands in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. TNC has already transferred over 11,000 acres of the CCF lands it manages to the Forest Service, and federal land and water conservation funding has already been awarded to transfer another 7,000 acres of these higher elevation acres to the Forest Service by 2024. That's outside the 27,000 acre community vision area though. The Forest Service transfers reconnect lands within the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest. They help preserve clean water and resilient watersheds. They provide diverse public recreation opportunities, and they protect habitat for important wildlife species, including spotted owls, gray wolves, and bull trout. 2 years ago, the opportunity arose to include CCF's Tainum watershed in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest as well. With support from the Checkerboard Partnership, TNC has worked with the U.S. Forest Service for 2 years to propose LWCF funding for the project. And we're very pleased to announce that phase 1 of the Tainum project received $6.5 million in the President's fiscal year 23 budget. This 4,000 acre Tainum phase actually ranked #2 nationally on the U.S. Forest LWCF project list, which means funding will certainly become official when Congress passes the budget later this fall. However, the total project cost is about 14.5 million, we estimate. Phase 2 is approximately 8,000 acres. We're exploring other avenues right now to fully fund the project this year by talking with members of our congressional delegation. There is a potential to increase the funding through Congress's community project funding process, sometimes referred to as earmarks. And we've submitted a request to Senator Murray, Senator Cantwell, and Representative Schreier. The Checkerboard Partnership has offered to support this ask with a letter from its members, which is very much appreciated. Next slide. The next area I want to talk about is the Cabin Creek drainage. CCF's Cabin Creek acreage is approximately 6,000 acres outside the National Forest, and it's checkerboarded with Washington DNR trust lands and pieces of the Teanaway Community Forest. It is fairly high elevation with a good site index and correspondingly high growth rate for timber. It is in close proximity to the Palouse Cascades Trail, Lake Easton State Park, and winter snow parks managed by the state. It is particularly well known for its winter recreation opportunities. Cabin Creek is expected to be acquired by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources by 2025, and then managed as county trust lands for the benefit of Kittitas County. We recently learned that the project ranked number 11 nationally for forest legacy funding at $5.7 million. This means it is certain to be funded in the next year. The project, known as the Kittitas Working Forest, will reconnect DNR checkerboard ownership outside the National Forest, avoid the all too common conversion of working forests to development, protect wildlife habitat and connectivity. It aligns very well with the next phase of I-90 wildlife overpasses and underpasses near Easton. It should eventually provide upwards of $2 million annually in timber revenue to Kittitas County. And state ownership and management is also expected to bolster the local timber economy and private forest stewardship in the area. I'd like to share a little story with this group about the Cabin Creek project and the important role played by member Vic Monahan. I don't know if Vic has joined us, but as many of you know, TNC's original idea was that this project would be a recreation-heavy community forest. We submitted our first application for forest legacy funding about 5 years ago. And notably, WFFA did not provide a letter of support. When we reached out, it was suggested that we talk to Vic, a neighboring timber owner whose family has worked the Cabin Creek area for nearly a century. We did, and Vic was happy to articulate his own objections to the project, citing in particular the growing challenges to private forestry on the east side due to increased development and recreation, whether authorized, unauthorized, or simply overflow. We listened to Vic and then pivoted the project to emphasize county trust lands, in other words, working forestry. We're so grateful to have Vic's full support now, not only for this project, but for the community forest project on Clay Elm Ridge, which Melissa will talk about in a few minutes. Next slide. CCF's Dahmer Ridge and watershed block is approximately 1,500 acres. Its protection is critical for wildlife habitat and connectivity, as well as clean water. The source for local drinking water supplies is located on the property. There's a takeout pond high on Dahmer Creek. The Suncadia Master Plan Resort borders these forest lands to the east and accesses through the exclusive Tumble Creek neighborhood. There is no set plan yet for the future ownership and management of this acreage, but we know it will be important to emphasize forest health, limited recreation, and both forest and stream habitat protection. TNC expects to work very closely with KCT and the Checkerboard Partnership on this project and will provide updates as possible. And then next slide. The final block in our community vision, community forest vision, is the Clay Elm Ridge. And I'm gonna let Melissa talk to you about it because the Checkerboard Partnership has really been focusing on it. But I will say that more than any of the other lands, Clay Elm Ridge is strategically located between the rapidly urbanizing Clay Elm Valley and DNR's Teanaway Community Forest. Therefore, proper management of the ridge as a community forest would provide both a bridge connecting the growing community to its natural resource lands and expanded outdoor recreation, and a buffer from the threat that community faces from extreme wildfire. That way, for this reason, we have always said that the Cle Elum Ridge is probably the best suited to be a community forest. And now I'm going to let Melissa talk more to you about community forests.
Great. So as Jane was saying, right, these lands are super meaningful to our communities. Our communities have historical and emotional ties to these lands. It's what we see every day when we're just even looking outside our window or driving through our communities. And we're seeking to turn these lands in particular into a community forest. And we're trying to work with the Department of Natural Resources to see if we can realize that goal. So, like Jane was saying, super exciting week for us. We received, I think, around $14 million in funding. Jane spoke about the Land and Conservation Fund, which is for the TANUM, as well as the Forest Legacy funding that we're getting that will be for Cabin Creek. But we also received $3 million from the Washington Recreation and Conservation Office. And that $3 million will be to purchase the first phase of a community forest up on the Cle Elum Ridge. So we're looking at about 1,200 acres that we think that we'll be able to purchase with that $3 million. And as you know, like these lands border the Teanaway Community Forest, which is co-managed by the Department of Natural Resources and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so we've been working with DNR to see if it is possible to start either another community forest that is managed by DNR, or have these lands potentially incorporated into the Teanaway Community Forest. And those conversations are we're very early in the process of those conversations right now. But we're very hopeful that we'll be able to work together to make that happen. Okay, and then just real briefly, I talked about how we went and visited all these community forests all over the country, and they were so amazing. It was really cool to see all the different ways that communities came together to make these things happen, and just all the different benefits that they can provide. And each is unique to their community, but there are some overriding commonalities that they all share, right? So they're guided by the local community. They're owned and managed either by the community or on behalf of the community, but regardless, there's a level of collaboration. So the communities are providing input into how they are managed. It is a balanced management, so we're not just managing for recreation, we're not just managing for forest health, right? We're balancing it all so that we're getting multi-benefits out of things. And then finally, they're protected from development, which is a main goal. So there's lots of benefits from this, and particularly for the lands when we're thinking about the ones on the Cle Elum Ridge. You know, there's 9 main benefits that we've come up with, right? So it's the forest health and restoration work that we've been talking about, right? Providing our communities that fire buffer that's so important. There's also the diverse amount of recreational opportunities. We have hiking, biking, horseback riding in the summertime. And in the wintertime, there's snowmobiling, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing. And, you know, it's how we can just walk out of our back door. We're really fortunate and able to go up onto the ridge. These benefits provide local economic growth, and then it also provides educational opportunities. Our school district up here is right across the road from the community forest, and down the road should be able to access these lands, right, and incorporate them into programming and other things. We also want to make sure that we're making a connection with our underserved communities and providing them the opportunity to get outdoors and connect. And we also want to provide those cultural and traditional uses that are meaningful to the Yakama Nation and other tribes. These lands are amazing because they provide us with clean water and healthy habitat for the plants and wildlife that we share these lands with. And then finally, it provides our community an opportunity to participate and manage that sense of local control that's really important. for anyone that's interested, we always encourage you to get involved. So we hold monthly meetings at the end of each month. They're about like 2 to 3 hours, depending on what we're working on. And we do, you know, we have essentially probably between like 20 and 30 people that participate or are engaged in some way right now. As a member of the group, you have to either live in Kittitas County or be a member of the Yakima Nation. You know, these people are representatives of the land management agencies or local nonprofit groups, joining landowners, and just community members that are committed to seeing this thing through. In order to vote, you need to be present for 2 of the 3 previous meetings. That way we're not just having people come in on one meeting, you know, and we want you to be engaged and involved in part of the conversations, and not just coming in and saying no to something. And then also, you know, all our participants are willing to abide by our rules for participation, right? And that's essentially getting people to buy into, like, we're working collaboratively. We're not just having one person or 2 people dictate things, like we're working together to find the best solution. So as we continue forward, we're going to continue to work to expand the participation in our group. We're going to keep doing community engagement and outreach. We're going to gather and incorporate the community input and values that we've already received, and maybe build on that some more to create an even deeper understanding of how we can make this community forest project really meaningful to those that live here. We're going to work with DNR to see if we can acquire the land and steward these lands in perpetuity. And we're going to be doing a lot more grant writing and fundraising. And that's what we have. Any questions from the group? You can either put it in the chat, or you can also unpause yourself or unmute yourself at this point if you'd like. We can just have a conversation.
So as Melissa said, if anybody has any questions, you can unmute yourself. Doesn't look like any questions have been in the chat. Nothing?
No?
It was so clear, everything that's going on.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm a landowner on, let's see, it would be the west side of Lake Cle Elum, up on the hill, adjoining, I guess it's Nature Conservancy land. And there's a rectangle there of land.
Let me scroll through it.
It's a green rectangle of land.
It's Dahmer.
It's just south of the watershed area.
Yeah, right
south
here.
of Dahmer. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's, what's going to happen there? Or is there any plans, or is it still in limbo?
Sure. So Jane kind of touched on that a little bit. We're still working on the best way to incorporate those lands into something. It could be that perhaps it's incorporated into the community forest. There also might be other solutions for those lands. We're a little bit more behind on those lands. Or I wouldn't even say behind. We just haven't quite figured out like how exactly that's going to look yet. But we're working on it.
Okay, I'd also like to see access to the Dahmer Peak Trail. I know the road goes over and across some private land and so forth, but that would be really nice to have access to that trail that goes from Dahmer Peak and heads north along the ridge line.
This.
Right, and I think, Mark, I think that is on the CCF land that TNC manages. And I think right now I haven't been out there for a while myself, but it probably needs to be brushed and cleared. And
yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, it's hard to get to. And as Melissa was saying, and as I mentioned, it's, there are going to be a lot of sort of conflicting objectives and goals for those lands. We really know that forest health is going to be really important, and habitat. And we're not sure yet what the recreation is going to look like, but I know that's an existing trail. It's a Forest Service trail, and it's an important one. So we'll be keeping that in mind.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, then I am going to turn it over to the amazing Phil Hess. And anyone, I guess, that was just here for the presentation and isn't a member of the WFFA can choose to leave if they want to.
Thank you, Jane and Katie and Melissa, for an excellent presentation. You're welcome to stay and listen to Phil and stay with the meeting, or leave the meeting also. That's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, in case you tuned in late, this is the annual spring meeting of the Kittitas Chapter of WFFA. That's the Washington Farm Forestry Association. And I want to add my thanks to Katie, Jane, and Melissa for this excellent presentation. And it's very, very relevant outcome for our community. Just to give you a little bit of background, WFFA is a statewide organization consisting of family forest owners or small forest landowners across the state. There's about 16 chapters. Kittitas is one of them. We have about 75 members in our chapter. Most of them are in Kittitas County. And this represents about 200 individuals and roughly about 8,500 acres. So our chapter is unique in that we only have 2 meetings a year. We have 2 officers and no committees. And yet we have 75 members. I think that's pretty neat. You can view our chapter activities by going to the WFFA website, clicking on Kittitas, and you'll find a lot of information there about our chapter activities. Our goal as your chapter leadership is to keep you informed and updated on what is happening in our area about forest land and related issues, and relative to making Central Washington a fire adapted community. And this is why we are very heavily involved with KFAC. KFAC, if you don't know yet, is Kittitas Fire Adapted Communities Coalition. And that is the go-to place for how we are working to make Kittitas County, particularly Upper Kittitas County, a fire adapted community. As you probably know, we are in a fire prone area. If you want to get into the weeds on that, Kittitas County ranks 92 on a range of 1 to 100 in terms of wildfire risk in the state of Washington, 92 out of 100. So we all know that, and that's why KFAC is such a important part of our local activities. On top of that, it's been reported that Kittitas County is the fastest growing county in the state, if not one of the fastest growing or the fastest growing county in the state. Our current population is about 40,000. Can you believe that? Kittitas County, 40,000. You wouldn't think that if you go to Roslyn on a farmer's market day. But anyway, in the next 20 years, that's projected to grow to 120,000. So you can see what growth management issues are facing us in the near term. And one of our goals as forest landowners, and those of us that are forest landowners realize this, that it's one of our goals is to make sure that we can pass on a green forested landscape to the next generation rather than one that's gray or black. So this is why, in a nutshell, we can simplify this by saying that means managing forest vegetation on a landscape level across all ownerships so that fire, which is inevitable, stays on the ground rather than in the canopy of the trees. And this means more than just our defensible space. So that's one of the agenda items. It's always on our WFFA meeting list, is helping our members and their neighbors become managing their vegetation so that they're fire resilient. And there's a lot of help out there. We don't have to do this all on our own. The DNR has a very active cost share program. Kittitas Conservation District has a financial assistance program. And so this is ongoing. It's been going on for quite a while. So it's not like nothing is being done. A lot is being done. As you've heard Melissa and Katie talk about the TNC activities on Plum Ridge with prescribed fire and their forest health entries up there. So anyway, to give you a little better snapshot of that, I've invited Rachel Mickey, our DNR local service forester, to talk to us a little bit about the cost share programs. Are you there, Rachel? Ta-da. I don't see Rachel, but that's okay. You can find her contact information on the DNR website, or you can find it on our website, the chapter page on the WFFA website. And Rachel is the go-to person if you have questions or concerns about the vegetation from the ground up, from the soil right to the treetops, about the condition of your forest and the understory in terms of fire resiliency and forest health. And they also, so that's in the cost share program. And it is a cost share program, so you're going to be out of pocket some money. And they have a schedule of what their limits are for various activities. And generally it means thinning of trees, pruning of trees, the ladder fuels, and slash disposal. And there's some other cost share activities in there. But currently there's about 134 acres in the cost share program for 2022. There's another 300 acres that DNR is involved with. And these are 100% grant money projects. And these are things like on the Wheel Road, the Lambert Road, and Taylor Road. And this summer you'll see quite a bit of activity on Plum Ridge, Big Tail Road, Horizon Ridge Drive, Forest Ridge, and these are all north of Plum. And so there is a lot going on. So anyway, we are involved with a half a dozen different projects. Your chapter leadership is, and so this involvement is how we are able to keep our members updated and current, because about 50% of our members, of those 75 members, are non-resident. They live on the west side and they have property over here. So Patty does a wonderful job with email, and we keep we try to keep our chapter page up to date. And again, that's on the WFFA website. Just click on Kittitas and you can see the activities that we're involved with. If any of you are there on that page and you have questions, there's an email link there to ask us questions or make suggestions on how we can make our outreach, our WFFA outreach to our family forest community in Kittitas County more effective. Well, we'd love to hear from you. That's our goal. Any questions? I see the chat box here has got
Phil, I think we just had some chats about motorized use in the Central Cascades forest landscape. So just so you
Okay.
know, yeah.
okay. Okay. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We went up, we had a high of 24. We're at 16 right now, which is not a bad turnout for a Saturday. And we
It's great.
appreciate your participation and your support. And I want to assure you that our chapter, our second meeting this year, is going to be our traditional picnic and a potluck picnic at one of our members' properties. And that's generally in September or October. So stay tuned for that. That's a really good event. It's not only a social event, but it's also an educational event. And we might have that on a place on the Markovich Road this year, if Shirley and Robert Clark would agree to host that again. There's Shirley with her and Robert are joining us today. Okay, good to have you all.
Phil,
Thank you again, Melissa and Katie, for your presentation. And it's thanks everybody for your participation, and hope to see you soon.